Something in the Gnostic diagnosis refuses to stay buried. This is worth noticing. Ideas die all the time. Entire philosophical systems flourish for a century and then vanish without progeny. Mystery cults that once commanded thousands of devotees leave nothing but inscriptions we can barely translate. The Mediterranean world of the 2nd century was thick with competing cosmologies, salvation schemes, esoteric initiations. Most are footnotes now. Some aren't even that. But Gnosticism keeps returning. Not as a continuous tradition, the Church saw to that. Not as a living religion with unbroken lineage. It returns as independent rediscovery, as parallel invention, as an idea that surfaces whenever minds press hard enough against certain questions. The Cathars of medieval France, the Mandaeans of Iraq, still practicing. Kabbalistic thought with its shattering vessels and scattered sparks. William Blake's Urizen, the blind creator who builds rational cages. Philip K. Dick receiving transmissions from a satellite he called Wallace. Convinced reality was a black iron prison run by a deranged god. These aren't all the same thing. A scholar of religion would rightly protest the conflation. The Cathars had their own theology, distinct from Valentinian Gnosticism. Kabbalah emerges from Jewish mystical tradition, with its own vocabulary and concerns. Dick was a science fiction writer having a breakdown, or a breakthrough, in the mid-1970s, not a student of Nag Hammadi. And yet, strip away the specific mythologies, the local vocabularies, the cultural particularities, and a shape remains. The same shape keeps appearing. This world is not ultimate reality. It was made by something that is not the true source. Something in us predates this world and does not belong to it. Knowledge, not faith, is the way out. Why does this pattern persist? One answer: because it's a psychological defense mechanism. Life is suffering. Consciousness means awareness of mortality. The Gnostic diagnosis is a sophisticated coping strategy. It reframes the horror by declaring it illegitimate. The world is bad because it was made badly. We suffer not because we are flawed, but because we are trapped in a flawed construction. And there's an exit. The pain is temporary. This answer has merit. It may even be partly true, but it's not sufficient. Plenty of psychological defense mechanisms don't persist across millennia. Plenty of comforting beliefs fade when their cultural context changes. The Gnostic pattern doesn't just persist. It keeps being reinvented by people who never read the original text. It emerges independently in minds that have no historical connection to the Gnostics of Alexandria. This suggests it isn't just projection. It might be recognition. December 1945, Upper Egypt, near the town of Nag Hammadi. A farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman is digging for sabak, a soft soil used for fertilizer, at the base of the Jabal al-Tarif cliffs. His methoc strikes something hard, a sealed clay jar about a meter tall. He hesitates. Local legend has it that jars like this can contain jinn. Opening one is not automatically wise, but jinn can also guard treasure. He breaks it open. No jinn, no gold. Just old books. 13 leather-bound codices, their pages brown and brittle, covered in a script he can't read. The story of what happened next is tragicomic. Muhammad Ali's family was embroiled in a blood feud. Shortly after the discovery, he and his brothers murdered the man who had killed their father, hacking him to pieces. The books became an afterthought. His mother burned some of the pages as kindling. Others were sold on the black market for almost nothing. By the time scholars realized what had been found, the codices had been scattered, confiscated by the Egyptian government, and partially smuggled to Europe. It took decades to reassemble, translate, and publish them. The complete Nag Hammadi library didn't appear in English until 1977. But what it contained was extraordinary. For 16 centuries, almost everything we knew about Gnosticism came from people who hated it. The early church fathers, Irenaeus, Hippolytus, Tertullian, had written extensive refutations of Gnostic teachings. These heresiologists quoted the Gnostics in order to mock them, to warn Christians against their errors, to systematically dismantle their arguments. It was like trying to understand early Christianity by reading only its pagan critics. The Nag Hammadi library changed that. Suddenly, we had the Gnostics in their own words. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Secret Book of John, the Gospel of Truth, on the origin of the world, the hypostasis of the Archons. Texts that had been declared heretical, hunted down and destroyed. But some group of believers had hidden them in a jar and buried them in the desert, trusting that a future age might receive what their own age had condemned. What do these texts actually say? They are not uniform. Gnosticism was never a single coherent system. It was more like a family of systems, variations on shared themes, but certain features recur. Reality is layered. There is a true divine realm, the Pleroma, the fullness, and a false divine realm, the cosmos we inhabit. The Pleroma is light, life, unity. The cosmos is shadow, suffering, fragmentation. We live in the copy, not the original. The creator of this cosmos is not the highest god. He's a lesser being, often called the Demiurge. From the Greek demiurgos, craftsman. He shaped matter, but he did not create the original light that got trapped in it. He's ignorant of higher realms, and worse, he's arrogant in his ignorance. I am God, he declares, and there is no other. This proclamation is the original sin, not human disobedience, but divine self-deception. Something of the true divine is trapped here. Sparks of light, fragments of the Pleroma, got caught in the Demiurge's construction, These sparks are us, or rather, they are the deepest part of us, the part that knows something is wrong. We're not merely bodies, we're not merely minds. We are pneuma, spirit, a piece of what was before this world existed. Salvation comes through gnosis, not through faith, not through obedience, not through sacrifice, through knowing, seeing reality clearly, recognizing what you are and where you come from. The truth will set you free because the prison is made of lies. Wake up and the walls dissolve. Reading these texts 2,000 years after they were written, having no prior exposure to Gnostic thought, you might feel an odd sensation. Recognition, as if you were remembering something rather than learning it. The Gnostics had a word for this too. Anamnesis, unforgetting. The knowledge isn't transmitted from outside. It's already there, buried, waiting to be excavated. The teacher doesn't give you something you lack. The teacher reminds you of what you forgot. This is either a very convenient rhetorical move or a genuine phenomenology of the experience. Both are possible. Perhaps both are true. If Gnosticism were a purely local phenomenon, a peculiar efflorescence of Hellenistic syncretism that arose in Alexandria and died with the Roman persecution, it would still be historically interesting. But its claims wouldn't carry any special weight. We would file it alongside Mithraism and the cult of Isis. Fascinating, but no more relevant to our current situation than any other dead religion. The Gnostic intuition doesn't stay dead. That's what matters. Consider the Cathars, 12th century southern France, a millennium and a world away from Roman Egypt. The Cathars, also called Albigensians after the town of Albi, developed a theology that the Catholic Church declared heretical in terms that would have been familiar to Irenaeus. They believed in two principles, one good and one evil. They believed the material world was created by the evil principle, or at least by a flawed, lesser god. They believed the true God had no part in the creation of matter. They believed human souls were sparks of divine light imprisoned in flesh. No direct line of transmission connects the Cathars to the Gnostics of antiquity. The Nag Hammadi texts were buried and lost. The heresiological writings were available but hardly constituted a manual for belief. And yet, the Cathar worldview recapitulates the Gnostic pattern with remarkable precision. Reality is a prison. The creator is a warden. Escape requires awakening. The Church's response to the Cathars was instructive. Genocide. The Albigensian Crusade from 1209 to 1229 killed an estimated 200,000 to 1 million people. When the papal legate was asked how to distinguish Cathars from faithful Catholics during the sack of Béziers, he allegedly replied, "Kill them all, God will know his own." The intensity of the response is itself evidence. The Church didn't exterminate every heresy with this fervor. Something about dualism, about the claim that the Creator was not the true God, touched a nerve so raw that total annihilation seemed necessary. Perhaps orthodoxy sensed that this wasn't just a theological error, but an existential threat. A rival interpretation that, if taken seriously, dissolved the entire structure of religious authority. If the creator of the world is not the supreme God, but an ignorant pretender, then his representatives on earth are not channels to the divine. They are, at best, deluded, at worst, collaborators. The Gnostic diagnosis doesn't just challenge specific doctrines. It challenges the legitimacy of all institutions that claim to mediate between humanity and ultimate reality. But the pattern extends beyond the Mediterranean and its successor cultures. Hinduism, in its philosophical traditions, develops the concept of Maya, illusion. The phenomenal world we perceive is not ultimately real. It's a veil, a projection, a cosmic dream. The true reality is Brahman, the unchanging absolute, which is also the deepest nature of the self, Atman. To mistake the world of appearances for reality is avidya, ignorance, the fundamental error that traps us in samsara, the endless cycle of birth and death. The structure is familiar, a true reality concealed by a false appearance. The prison of cycling existence, liberation through knowledge, specifically through recognizing what you truly are. Buddhism takes a different metaphysical route, rejecting the notion of a permanent self, but retains key structural elements. Dukkha, suffering or unsatisfactoriness, pervades conditioned existence. The world as ordinarily experienced is characterized by ignorance. The path out is not faith or sacrifice, but wisdom, prajna, direct insight into the nature of reality. Kabbalah, the mystical tradition of Judaism, offers its own variation. In the Lurianic version, developed by Isaac Luria in the 16th century, creation begins with a divine contraction, Tzimtzum, in which the infinite God withdraws to make room for the finite world. Vessels were meant to contain the divine light, but they shattered, Shevirat HaKlim, scattering the sparks throughout creation. The task of humanity is tikkun, repair, gathering the scattered sparks, restoring the broken unity, the sparks again. I'm not claiming that Hinduism, Buddhism, Kabbalah, and Gnosticism are all secretly the same thing. They differ in crucial ways: metaphysics, ethics, practice, and social context. The Hindu sage Shankara is not a Gnostic. The Buddha's anatta, the non-self doctrine, directly contradicts the Gnostic pneuma, the divine spark of individual self. Kabbalah is deeply committed to Jewish law and practice in ways Gnosticism never was. But there's a morphological resonance, a family resemblance across traditions that have no direct contact with each other. The same questions keep generating structurally similar answers. The surface world is not ultimate reality. Something is fundamentally wrong with how we ordinarily experience existence. Humans contain something that links them to a deeper or higher level. Liberation, enlightenment, salvation comes through direct knowledge or insight, not just belief. This could be coincidence. It could be independent responses to universal human experiences: death, suffering, the strangeness of consciousness. Or it could be pointing at something. The Gnostics would say the resonance exists because the diagnosis is correct. All these traditions are recognizing the same underlying situation described in different vocabularies. The prison has different names in different languages, but the prisoners, when they remember themselves, all describe the same walls. Let's take the Gnostic myth seriously for a moment. Not as literal history, not as revealed scripture, as a model, a way of thinking about the structure of reality that makes certain features salient. Every myth is a model. Genesis models creation as intentional act by a benevolent God who pronounces his work good. The Big Bang models creation as an explosion from a singularity with no intentional agent involved. Both are simplifications. Both highlight some features and obscure others. The question is not whether a model is true in some absolute sense. It's whether the model is useful, whether it illuminates something that would otherwise remain dark. The Gnostic model illuminates suffering. Orthodox Christianity has to explain why a good, omnipotent, omniscient God created a world containing so much pain. The standard answers, free will, soul-making, and mystery, have been debated for millennia without resolution. The problem of theodicy is a wound that won't heal because the framework makes it difficult to treat. The Gnostic model doesn't have this problem. The world contains suffering because the world was made by a being who is neither fully good nor fully wise. The Demiurge didn't create evil intentionally. He created it ignorantly. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know there was anything higher than himself to know. This is a different kind of tragedy than sin and fall. It's not a moral failure that could have been avoided. It's a structural error in the architecture of reality itself. The cosmos isn't broken because someone made a bad choice. The cosmos is broken because it was assembled by a blind craftsman working without blueprints, convinced he was the only one in the workshop. If this sounds strange, consider how it resonates with what we now understand about evolution. The process that shaped life on Earth is not benevolent. It has no intentions at all. It is an algorithm. Variation, selection, inheritance. It produces wonders, the eye, the wing, the brain. But it produces them through a relentless competition. Predation, parasitism, and extinction. Every creature alive is the descendant of an ancestor who survived by eating other creatures, outcompeting siblings, or exploiting ecological niches before others could. Beauty and horror intertwined. The sublime and the terrible, the same process. If you had to design a god to fit the observable operations of nature, not the nature of Sunday school, where the lambs lie down with lions, but nature as it actually functions, you wouldn't design a loving father. You would design something closer to the Demiurge. Immensely powerful, not malicious exactly, but utterly indifferent to individual suffering, operating by laws that are consistent but not kind. The Gnostics looked at nature and concluded it was made by a blind god. Darwin looked at nature and concluded it was made by a blind process. Both are saying something similar. What made us doesn't have our well-being at heart because it doesn't have a heart. Where they differ, and this difference is crucial, is on the question of what else exists. For mainstream secular materialism, the blind process is all there is. There is no pleroma, no realm of light, no higher reality. The prison is the only building, and calling it a prison is itself a mistake. There's nowhere else to escape to. The Gnostics refused that closure. They insisted that something in us knows this world is not our home. The spark, the pneuma, the fragment of light that remembers the fullness. Whatever you call it, it is the witness to the inadequacy of the Demiurge's creation. Its very existence proves there is more. And that insistence, that consciousness is evidence of something beyond the material, is what makes Gnosticism more than pessimism. The Demiurge built the prison, but he didn't create the prisoners. They come from somewhere else. And that somewhere else is still real. In the beginning, before the beginning, there was the Pleroma. The word is Greek. Pleroma means fullness, completion, the opposite of emptiness. In Gnostic cosmology, the Pleroma is the true divine realm. It's not a place in space. It is prior to space. Space, like time, belongs to the lower creation. The Pleroma is what exists before the categories we use to organize experience. Describing it requires negative theology, saying what it is not. It is not material. It is not divided. It is not lacking. Everything that exists in the Pleroma exists in perfect unity, perfect sufficiency, and perfect peace. There's no striving because there's no deficiency, no desire because nothing is missing. The Pleroma contains the true God, often called the Father or the One or the Invisible Spirit. But this is not the Creator God of Orthodox religion. The true God does not do anything in the sense of exerting effort or making choices. The true God simply is, radiating reality the way the sun radiates light, without intention or exertion. And from this source emanate the Aeons. The Aeons are divine powers, aspects of the fullness, conceptually distinct but not actually separate from the source. They have names: Nous, the mind; Aletheia, the truth; Logos, the word; Zoe, the life; Anthropos, the human; and Ecclesia, church. Different Gnostic systems enumerate them differently. The Valentinian system speaks of 30 Aeons arranged in pairs, but the basic idea is consistent. The Aeons are the organs of the divine, the ways the one differentiates into the many while remaining one. Think of it as a spectrum emerging from white light. The light itself is undifferentiated, but passed through a prism. It reveals itself as containing all colors, each distinct, yet each belonging to the same beam. The Aeons are like that, the Pleroma showing itself, the fullness making its contents distinguishable without losing its unity. And among the Aeons is Sophia. Sophia, wisdom. She will become the pivot point of the entire Gnostic drama. In most versions of the myth, it is Sophia whose act, whose error, whose longing, whose reach beyond herself sets the catastrophe in motion. But we should pause here before the fall. The Pleroma, as described, is perfection, and perfection is not a starting point for story. Story requires conflict, requires lack, requires something happening. The Pleroma doesn't happen, it simply is. The Gnostic myth needs to explain how we got from that static fullness to this dynamic suffering. How did perfection break? This is where Gnostic thought makes its most radical move. The break doesn't come from outside. It comes from within the Pleroma itself, not from the true God who remains impassible, but from one of the Aeons, from wisdom herself. Something wanted more than everything, even in the realm of total sufficiency. Something reached. What happens when perfection aches? The myth of Sophia varies across Gnostic texts, but the core shape persists. Sophia, the Aeon of wisdom, dwelling in the light of the Pleroma, experiences something she should not experience. Lack. Longing. The desire to know the Father directly, to comprehend the incomprehensible, to reach the unreachable. In some versions, this is curiosity pushed past its proper limit. In others, it is love so intense that it breaks the structure that contains it. In still others, Sophia acts alone, without the consent of her partner. And this solitary action is itself the violation. Whatever the motivation, Sophia reaches. She extends herself toward the depths of the Father, seeking to grasp what cannot be grasped. And in that reaching, something goes wrong. She cannot contain what she reaches for. Her extension produces a byproduct. An abortion, some texts say, using language deliberately harsh. Her desire gives birth to something that should not exist. A being that has come from her power but is cut off from the Pleroma. A God that doesn't know it isn't God. This is the Demiurge, child of Sophia's error, cast out of the fullness into the void. The theological psychology here is precise. The Demiurge is not evil in the sense of choosing evil. He is ignorant in the deepest possible way. He does not know that he is ignorant. He looks around and sees nothing but the void and himself. He concludes, logically given his data, that he is the supreme being. I am God, he says, and there is no other. This declaration is the inversion of truth. There is another. There's the Pleroma he came from, but he cannot see it. His ignorance is structural, built into his origin. He is the blind craftsman, not because his eyes don't work, but because he doesn't know there is anything to see. And with the materials available to him, Sophia's stolen light, the formless void he begins to build. The cosmos. Our cosmos. The Gnostic myth thus inverts the orthodox creation narrative at every point. In Genesis, creation is good, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. In the Gnostic telling, creation is a catastrophe. The world exists because something went wrong. We are living in the aftermath of a divine error. But there is a complication. Sophia's light is in the mix. The Demiurge may be ignorant, but the substance he's working with contains sparks of the true divine. When he creates humans, usually drawing on archetypes he doesn't understand, he unwittingly installs fragments of Sophia's light in them. The prisoners contain something that doesn't belong to the prison. This is the source of our unease. This is why we look at the stars and feel we should be able to reach them. This is why suffering feels like injustice rather than mere fact. Something in us remembers the fullness. Something knows. In the Gnostic reading, the feeling you had that led you to this video, the sense that reality is not quite right, that there is more than you've been shown, is not neurosis. It is not failure to adjust. It is the spark in you recognizing that it is not at home. Let us look at the Demiurge more closely. The Demiurge appears throughout Gnostic literature under various names. Yaldabaoth is the most common, a name that may derive from Hebrew-Aramaic words meaning child of chaos or begetter of the heavens. He is sometimes depicted with the head of a lion and the body of a serpent, sometimes with the face of an ass, sometimes as a serpent with a lion's head. These images are not accidental. The lion represents majesty and power. The Demiurge is not weak. The serpent represents the chthonic, the primal, the bound to matter. The ass represents stupidity. The composite conveys the Gnostic diagnosis: a being of tremendous power, utterly earthbound, and fundamentally foolish in its self-assessment. But the Demiurge is not a devil. This is crucial to understand. Later Christian thought conflated the Gnostic Demiurge with Satan, treating him as simply another name for the adversary. But the Gnostic texts themselves don't make this equation. The Demiurge is not malicious. He doesn't know he's hurting anyone. He's not rebelling against God. He doesn't know there's a God to rebel against. The Demiurge is, if anything, a tragic figure. He does the best he can with what he has. He creates order out of chaos, the planetary spheres, the cycles of nature, the laws that govern matter. He is, in his own frame, a good administrator. He keeps things running. The tragedy is that he is running a prison and he doesn't know it. The order he maintains is the order of captivity. The laws he enforces are the laws that keep the sparks from returning to their origin. Consider what this means for our ordinary category of God. In most religious traditions, God or the gods is the appropriate object of worship. You align yourself with the divine will. You obey divine commands. You shape your life to please your Creator. The relationship is vertical. God above, you below, and the proper stance is submission. Gnosticism inverts this. The being who demands worship, the Lord of this world, the one who issues commands and enforces consequences, is not the true God. He is the Demiurge. Worshipping him is not piety, but confusion. Worse, it is collaboration. You are helping the warden run the prison. The true God doesn't demand worship. The true God doesn't even demand anything. The Pleroma has no lack. The One doesn't need you. But the One is also where you come from. Turning toward the light is not obedience, it is homecoming. This is why Gnosticism was dangerous to religious institutions. If the God of this world is not the true God, then the priests of that God are not channels to the divine. Their rules, their rituals, their authority structures, all of it is part of the system that keeps you asleep. Every institution that claims to mediate between you and ultimate reality is either deceived or deceiving. The only authority is the spark within you. The only priest is your own awakening. The Demiurge did not work alone. Below him, or sometimes alongside him, the Gnostic cosmos is populated by the Archons. The word is Greek. Archon means ruler or authority. In the Athenian democracy, the Archons were high magistrates. In Gnostic mythology, they are the ruling powers of the cosmic spheres, the administrators of the prison. The Archons are usually associated with the planets. In the ancient world, 7 heavenly bodies moved against the fixed stars: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. Each was a sphere, a level of reality, and each was governed by an Archon. Some systems add more, but the basic picture is of a layered cosmos with Earth at the center and concentric shells of celestial power extending outward. This is not merely astronomy. It is theology and psychology. Each Archon governs not just a physical sphere, but a domain of influence over the soul. The 7 Archons correspond to 7 planetary powers, which correspond to 7 passions or drives that bind consciousness to matter. The Moon for fickleness and changeability, Mercury for greed and calculation, Venus for lust and desire, the Sun for pride and ambition, Mars for anger and violence, and Jupiter for complacency and false wisdom. The last one, Saturn, for melancholy and despair. This list varies across texts, but the pattern is consistent. The Archons are not just out there in the heavens. They are in here, in the structure of ordinary psychology. Our emotional life in this reading is not simply natural. It is installed, programmed. The passions that drive us are the operating system of the prison. When the Gnostics spoke of liberation, they meant liberation from archontic influence. Not just geographically, escaping the planetary spheres after death, but psychologically. Recognizing that your anger is not you, your greed is not you, your despair is not you. These are archontic implants, programs running in the soul that serve the Demiurge's order. The path of liberation in many Gnostic systems involved a literal ascent through the spheres. After death, the soul would rise, passing each archontic checkpoint and be challenged at each level. The Archons would demand that soul justify its passage. They would try to hold it, to weigh it down with the passions it had accumulated during life. The Gnostics developed passwords, secret names, ritual knowledge that would enable the ascending soul to answer the Archons correctly, to prove that it knew the structure of the cosmos and its own nature, and thus to pass through. I know who I am, the soul might say. I know where I come from. I know where I'm going. You have no power over me. This sounds like primitive magic. Perhaps it was, but consider it as a phenomenology rather than physics. The experience of dying, of consciousness transitioning out of embodied existence, is something humans have always attempted to navigate. If consciousness survives bodily death, a huge if, but one the Gnostics took for granted, then the state of consciousness at the moment of transition matters enormously. Going into death confused terrified, attached to the passions that defined embodied life, means remaining caught in the system. Going in with clear knowledge, knowing who you are, what this world is, where the exit leads, means liberation. The passwords are maps. The Archon names are labels for psychological forces that would otherwise operate invisibly. The Ascent ritual is a technology for dying well, or it's superstition. But superstition that takes seriously the question: what happens to consciousness when the body stops working? Mainstream secular thought doesn't have a better answer. It simply refuses the question. Everything we've described so far is cosmology, the structure of reality as the Gnostics mapped it. But cosmology only matters because of anthropology, the question of what we are and how we fit into the structure. The Gnostic answer is precise. You are a composite being. You are partly matter, the body, the Hyll. You are partly soul, the animate principle, the psyche. And you are, or you may be, partly spirit, the divine spark, the pneuma. These three levels correspond to three classes of human being, though here the interpretation becomes contested. Some Gnostic texts suggest that humans are born into categories: Hyllics, matter-bound, the psychics, soul-bound, and the pneumatics, spirit-aware. The Hyllics cannot awaken. They are too dense. The psychics might awaken if properly taught. The pneumatics will awaken eventually. The spark in them is too bright to stay hidden. This classification looks like spiritual elitism. The chosen few versus the hopeless masses. And some Gnostic groups probably did see it that way. But another reading is possible. The categories are not fixed at birth, but describe states of development. Everyone begins Hyllic, identified with the body and its needs. Some develop psychic awareness, operating from the level of personality and belief. And a few break through to pneumatic realization, recognizing the spark directly. In this reading, the categories are invitations, not sentences. The question is not what you were born as. The question is what you can become. Let's take these distinctions seriously as phenomenology, as descriptions of how different people actually experience being alive. The Hyllic lives in matter. This doesn't mean merely that they have a body. Everyone has a body. It means the body is their entire frame of reference. Hunger, pleasure, pain, comfort, threat. The world shows up as a field of resources and obstacles for biological survival. Meaning, if it arises at all, arises from satisfying bodily drives. This is not contemptible. It is, in one sense, entirely appropriate. We are embodied. The body has needs. Ignoring them is as foolish as being ruled by them. The Demiurge built these drives into the architecture for a reason, or at least his architecture produces them. They keep the organism running. But the Hyllic mistake is to believe that this is all there is. To reduce consciousness to the servant of biology. To see no further than the next meal, the next threat, the next mating opportunity. This is how the prison operates most efficiently. When the prisoners don't notice they're in a prison because they're entirely absorbed in the prison's maintenance schedule. The psychic lives in the soul. Here, the soul or psyche means something like personality, or the narrative self, or the locus of belief and value. The psychic has developed beyond mere biological drive. They have ideas about the world. They believe things. They have a sense of identity that includes but transcends the body. Most educated, thoughtful humans operate at this level. They have philosophies, religions, political commitments. They ask questions about meaning. They care about things beyond their immediate physical needs. And they can sacrifice bodily comfort for ideals. This is an enormous development beyond the Hillick baseline. But the psychic mistake is to confuse the soul with the spirit. To believe that the beliefs are the deepest truth. To identify absolutely with the narrative, the personality, the set of opinions that constitute who I am. The psychic is still trapped, but in a subtler prison. Instead of mere biology, they are confined by ideas about biology, by interpretive frameworks, by the sense of self that develop to navigate the Demiurge's world. The pneumatic has recognized the spark. This is not an idea about the spark, not a belief that the spark exists. Direct recognition. The way you know you're conscious, not because someone proved it to you, not because it appears in a textbook, but because you are it and cannot possibly doubt it. The pneumatic knows, I am not the body, though I have one. I am not the story, though I've lived one. And I am that which is aware, and that awareness is not a product of this world. It comes from somewhere else. It belongs to the Pleroma. This knowledge is Gnosis. Not propositional knowledge in the sense of knowing that. Not procedural knowledge in the sense of knowing how. Something more like acquaintance knowledge. Knowing directly by being. The pneumatic doesn't believe in the spark. The pneumatic is the spark and knows it. But if the spark is always already present, why doesn't everyone recognize it? The Gnostic answer: forgetting. The process of incarnation, of the spark becoming embedded in psyche and body, involves a kind of amnesia. The light forgets its origin. It becomes absorbed in the world of the Demiurge, fascinated by matter. Distracted by the psychic dramas of personality, unable to see past the immediate to its own nature. This forgetting is not an accident. It's a feature of the system. The Archons want you to forget. The entire structure of the prison is designed to keep your attention on anything except your true nature. Look at the body's needs. Look at the soul's stories. Look at the world's dramas. Just don't look at what's doing the looking. Liberation, then, is not learning something new. It is remembering something you have always known but have been hypnotized into forgetting. Anamnesis, unforgetting, the opposite of amnesia. Plato had a similar doctrine, though without the Gnostic cosmology. In the Meno, Socrates demonstrates that an uneducated slave boy can derive geometrical truths when properly questioned. He doesn't teach the boy geometry, he draws it out. The boy already knows. His soul knew before it was incarnated, and Socrates merely helps him remember. The Gnostics took this further. It's not just mathematical truths that are remembered. It's your own identity. It's where you came from. It's the fact that this world is not your home. The moment of anamnesis, when it happens, is not experienced as learning. It is experienced as recognition. Yes, this is what I've always known, but couldn't articulate. This is why I've always felt like a stranger here. This is the itch I couldn't scratch, the question I couldn't formulate, the unease that wouldn't quiet. The Gnostics would say that feeling is not neurosis. It is not maladjustment. It is not failure to be at peace with your circumstances. It is the spark remembering. We have now assembled the basic architecture of the Gnostic diagnosis. A true divine realm, the Pleroma, from which emanations, the Aeons, proceed. An era, Sophia's reach, that produces an ignorant creator, the Demiurge. A cosmos built by the creator, administered by ruling powers, the Archons, operating as a prison for fragments of divine light, the sparks or pneuma. A way out through direct knowledge, gnosis, that is not learning but remembering, Anamnesis. This is myth. It is not physics. It is not history. It is a model. But here's what's strange. The model keeps resonating with our most advanced attempts to understand reality. Space-time as emergent, not fundamental. The cosmos as not the base layer. Perception as interface, not direct access. The world as not simply given. Simulation as possibility, the whole thing as constructed by something we can't see. The Gnostics didn't have quantum mechanics or information theory or computational models. They had their experience, their reasoning, and their myths. They concluded that something was wrong with the world, was not the highest reality, that something in us doesn't belong here. And that knowledge, deep, direct, experiential knowledge, is the way through. 2,000 years later, we're starting to wonder if they were pointing at something real. The question is whether we can see it more clearly, whether our new tools, scientific, technological, computational, can bring into focus what they could only mythologize. That's where we go next.